To the inhabitants of the General Government of Warsaw, His Majesty the German Kaiser and His Majesty the Kaiser of Austria and Apostolic King of Hungary, supported by the firm confidence in the final victory of their arms and guided by the desire to lead the Polish territories towards a happy future, have agreed to form an independent state with a hereditary monarchy and constitution from these territories. The precise borders of the Kingdom of Poland remain to be determined. With these words, the creation of a Polish state was loudly and ceremoniously announced in the royal castle of Warsaw on the 5th of November 1916. For the first time in almost a century, the Polish flag was openly waved by the Warsavians. But this Kingdom of Poland didn't have a king, and in the end it was a mere shell full of empty promises designed by the German military to send more men into their certain death. This video will focus on the history of this strange Kingdom of Poland. We will ask why the matter of a Polish state suddenly became so important again, what the intentions behind this seemingly generous gesture were, why it ultimately came to disappoint everyone, and how it still laid the framework for an actually independent Polish Republic. The outbreak of the First World War marked an important turning point regarding the future of the Polish lands. Because for the first time since the partitions, Russia was at war with Germany, and for the first time since the arrival of Napoleon, Poland became a battleground. The solidarity that had persisted throughout the 19th century between the partitioning powers when it came to making sure that Polish desires for independence were dealt with, came to a sudden and rapid end. All empires raised huge armies and conscripted millions of people to fight for them, and the Poles found themselves under three different banners. From the very start, both Germany and Russia attempted to sway the Polish opinion to their side. Germany, who had gained quite a notoriety for its anti-Polish policies before the war, used propaganda in an attempt to stir up a revolt against the Muscovite yoke by fighting for freedom and independence. The Kaiser also asked the Pope to appoint a Pole as the Archbishop of Posen-Gnesen. These measures were fruitless, especially after German troops systematically burned down the border town of Kalisz in early August 1914 and shot hundreds of local civilians. The Russian Empire was much more successful in its efforts to ensure a smooth mobilization. It used the destruction of Kalisz as a propaganda device and used it to foster anti-German sentiments. On the 15th of August, Grand Duke Nicholas issued a manifesto, which read, "The hour has sounded when the sacred dream of your fathers and forefathers can come true. A century and a half has passed since the living flesh of Poland was torn in pieces, but her soul is not dead. It lives in the hope that the hour will come in which resuscitated Poland will reconcile herself fraternally with great Russia. The Russian troops bring you the happy message of reconciliation. May the frontiers disappear that divide the Polish nation, thus making of them a unity under the scepter of the Emperor of Russia." Though a bit hypocritical because Russia was one of the partitioning powers, the declaration was significant. By making claims on Austro-German territories, Russia encouraged Polish ambitions and completely broke with the pre-war order. During the practical stalemate on the Eastern Front in the first war year, however, the Polish question quietly faded away and would probably have slipped into irrelevance again had it not been for a sudden Austro-German victory. In May of 1915, the Gorlice-Tarnów offensive was launched by the Central Powers, whose aftermath forced the Russian army to retreat eastward. In August of the same year, German troops marched into Warsaw unopposed. With that, Austria and Germany were now in control over all of former Congress Poland. Following the victory, the newly gained Polish territories were divided into two so-called general governments. In the north, a German general governor ruled the lands from Warsaw, whereas the south was administered by an Austrian governor-general from Lublin. The Poles were ambivalent about the new occupying powers. On the one hand, they economically exploited the area by redirecting its raw materials and by systematically dismantling production sites. Furthermore, hundreds of thousands of Poles were deported to Germany as forced laborers. On the other hand, extensive repairs were conducted on destroyed buildings, the railway network was modernized and extended, and the Vistula River was used as a traffic route. Of course, all these economic improvements were only made so that the exploitation could be carried out more efficiently. Additionally, the school system got some much needed reforms. Polish was spoken in class again, the number of children that went to school increased, and in the Austrian zone 4 cities were allowed to govern themselves. Still, the war wasn't over yet. The German government devised no concrete plans regarding the future of Poland, still clinging on to the chance of maybe signing a separate peace treaty with Russia. Furthermore, the Austrians had already conceived their own plan, the so-called Austro-Polish Solution. According to this plan, the entirety of Congress Poland should be merged with the Crownland of Galicia and then be ruled under the Habsburg crown, either as a separate kingdom alongside Austria and Hungary, or as a direct subject of Austria. Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, the German Chancellor, agreed to that motion in October 1915. He decided to leave Poland to the Habsburg Empire because the return to a pre-war order was of utmost importance to him and because he doubted that the relations with Russia could ever be restored. Instead, he saw it as more desirable to keep Austria as a reliable partner and to cut Russia down in size. In return, Germany should annex a small strip of land along the border and, as some have definitely demanded, expel all the Poles from there. The Austro-Polish solution found itself under much criticism from many different sides. You had the German capitalists who feared that they would lose out on the valuable Polish industrial areas like Łódź and that their businesses with Russia would be disturbed. As the representative of the Chamber of Commerce in Oppeln put it, from an economic point of view, however, the annexation of important parts of Poland to Austria would be the worst of all solutions. It would hinder the economic and cultural development of the country and deprive Germany of new territory, the acquisition of which we would have to make an absolute war goal. Instead, Poland should be brought under Germany's economic sphere of influence, be it with a common customs union or not. The Prussian conservatives also disliked the idea. The Vice President of Prussia, Clemens von Delbrück, voiced concerns over the Poles gaining an influential position in the Austrian Empire. The German ambassador in Vienna, Heinrich von Tschirschky, feared that Austria could not handle this sudden growth in territory. Finally, the Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, declined the Austro-Polish solution, probably having been influenced by the aforementioned financial circles. During a meeting with the Austrian Foreign Minister in Berlin in April 1916, the German Chancellor officially swept the Austro-Polish solution off the table. So, what was the alternative? In October 1915, just 2 months after the capture of Warsaw, a certain liberal politician and associate of the Deutsche Bank, called Friedrich Naumann, published a book in which he explained how the future of Central and Eastern Europe should look like, Mitteleuropa. The book became an instant success and was sold in 4 editions over just 2 years. Naumann suggested that both the German and Austrian empires should cooperate together in political and economic means, while being surrounded by a number of small vassal states ranging from Scandinavia to the Bosporus. His views probably stemmed from his connections to the German financial capital. They had suffered tremendously from the loss of the colonies and from the British naval blockade, and in their eyes, only the control over vast parts of Europe could keep them afloat in the future. He considered Poland to hold a special role in the fulfillment of that plan as the first such puppet kingdom. The military had initially rejected these plans, still hoping that a separate peace with Russia might be an option. That changed when the situation suddenly became very dire for the Central Powers. In summer of 1916, Russia launched a large-scale offensive under the command of Alexei Brusilov against the Austro-Hungarian front. It was a big success in the short term, as Russia regained almost all of the lands it had lost on the southeastern front, and inflicted massive casualties on the Austrians. These losses had to be replaced by German soldiers. Additionally, Romania also joined the war, putting more pressure on the German military complex. At the same time, the Germans were busy fighting at Verdun and along the Somme. The Kaiserreich needed more men, and urgently. As such, the idea to tap the occupied Polish territories as a source for manpower developed. Erich Ludendorff, who became the de facto chief of staff in August 1916, was a huge supporter of this idea. He held no sympathy for the Polish nation, but the temptation of gaining up to 1 million new soldiers led him to consider offering a certain concession to Polish national demands. That concession being the establishment of a Polish puppet state. During a meeting between the Kaiser and senior German military commanders in Pless, the decision to proceed with that plan was made. This proved to be very controversial among many German politicians who called it foolish to restore a Polish state and instead wanted to simply annex a small piece of land. To convince them, Hans von Beseler was invited to present his case to the Prussian cabinet. Hans von Beseler was a Prussian general who had gained quite a reputation for himself after his role in the capture of Antwerp and Modlin near Warsaw. After his success, he became the Governor-General of the German occupation zone in Poland, which he ruled from the Belvedere Palace. He spoke not a single word of Polish and was blissfully unaware of Polish history, culture or politics. However, he travelled the country and got to know it better. His primary goal was to structure the administration in such a way that benefited the German economy the most, while staying relatively fair and benevolent to the Poles. He worked together with Polish parties who were willing to cooperate with the Central Powers. As such, he ceremoniously reopened the University of Warsaw with German funds to show that the era of Russification was over and to curry favour with Polish nationalists. He also aimed to educate the Polish students in a Western style to train a pro-German societal elite that would take over the country after the war's end. Still, he considered the Poles to be politically immature and thus unable to decide their own destiny. Instead, Poland should be led under the wise guidance of Father Germany. Von Beseler was one of the first people to recommend turning Poland into a puppet state. In a report to the Kaiser, von Beseler argued that Germany requires a buffer zone in the east. During the aforementioned speech before the Prussian cabinet, von Beseler made promises to the doubtful politicians. He claimed that within 8 months he could deploy around 36,000 soldiers, quite a low number considering how many men were needed. But he advocated for a long-term perspective. In any case, Polish soldiers will strengthen our armed forces and can perhaps one day occasionally be decisive. Under increasing pressure from Ludendorff and the German military, an Austro-German meeting was held at Pless in October 1916. After a lot of discussions, and despite the Austrians still holding a grudge after the simple dismissal of the Austro-Polish Solution, it was agreed to publish the Two Emperors Declaration to restore a Polish state. Which leads us back to the celebrations we talked about at the very beginning, when an independent Polish state with a hereditary monarchy was promised in Warsaw. A few days later, it became abundantly clear that the real intention behind this generous gesture was to convince Polish men to fight for the Central Powers. In the newspapers, the Poles were called upon to voluntarily join the German army. The call to arms. The proclamation of the independent Kingdom of Poland is now followed by a call to arms from the Allied powers. The formation of its own army is the first and most important step towards Poland's independence as a state. The first step will be followed by others. May Poland, in the further development of its state, be led and guided with confidence by those who, in this difficult time of war, must for the time being reserve power in the country so as not to jeopardize the unity and vigor of the military action. Upon being asked by Polish politicians when the necessary political institutions for a functioning kingdom will be created and when a government will be formed, von Beseler simply told them to show some restraint. He still considered the Poles to be politically immature and told his wife that this nation of children and fanatists had replaced the serious attitude to the state with an exaggerated outward patriotism. Very unsurprisingly, only a few Poles decided to follow the call to arms. Instead, a street demonstration took place in Warsaw, in which the protesters shouted, "We want to be Polish soldiers, not German mercenaries." Von Beseler feared that his whole project might end in disaster, and therefore granted his first actual political concession: the creation of a provisional Polish Council of State with 25 members. Deciding who should fill out these posts proved to be a difficult task for von Beseler. He had to find people who were willing to cooperate with the Central Powers, held at least some popularity among the Polish population, and were reliable. At that time, Polish politicians usually fell into one of 3 groups. 1. The Socialist Revolutionaries. 2. The pacifists, who were usually conservatives and right-wing nationalists who initially refused to cooperate with the Germans. And 3rd, the activists, who were usually left-wingers who agreed to cooperate with the Central Powers. The most important activist leader was Józef Piłsudski, who had led the 1st Brigade of the Polish Legion against the Russian army and who enjoyed vast respect from his soldiers. Simultaneously, he was also the leader of the Polska Organizacja Wojskowa, a secret military organization tasked with performing espionage and sabotaging missions. All of these parties held different views on where the yet undefined borders of the future Polish state should be, and some of them even claimed German territory. But in January of 1917, von Beseler succeeded, and all 25 members of the Council of State finally came together. Józef Piłsudski was part of this council and was tasked with creating the Polish armed forces under German command. Still, this didn't convince most Poles, who called the council high treason. The fundamental problem was that whatever concessions von Beseler made, they would never have been enough to dispel the rightful distrust and suspicion towards the German occupiers that had developed during the times of Otto von Bismarck and his successors. There was another big problem. Following the German declaration, the other countries made their own promises to establish an independent Poland. France included it in their new peace conditions in January 1917, and the American President Woodrow Wilson did the exact same thing. Following the February Revolution in Russia, the Petrograd Soviet granted the Poles the right to their own state. The revolution in Russia also meant that the fear-mongering campaign against the Tsar as the common enemy was no longer effective. As such, further concessions were needed to convince the Poles to join the army. Von Beseler promised to reduce the exploitation of the land, to create a constitution, and to finally determine the borders of the Polish state. Again, that proved to be very ineffective, as they were nothing but empty promises. In protest, Józef Piłsudski and 3 other members of the Council of State resigned in July 1917. From that moment on, he no longer cooperated with the Central Powers. In a speech he gave at the Hotel Brühlowski after his resignation, he said, "The common path with the Germans has come to an end. Russia, a common enemy, has played its role. The common interests no longer exist. All our interests and those of the Germans are opposed to each other. The sooner the Germans lose the war, the better. Basically, they have already lost it." Later, he encouraged his soldiers to refuse an oath of loyalty to the German Kaiser. For that, he was arrested and sent to Magdeburg Fortress, and the Polish armed forces were dissolved. 1 month later, the State Council simply resigned. It was replaced by a Regency Council consisting of the Archbishop of Warsaw, an aristocrat, and a landowner. The troubles didn't stop there, however. On the 9th of February 1918, the Central Powers signed a separate peace treaty with the newly independent Ukrainian People's Republic. In exchange for urgently needed food supplies, the Ukrainians were given the province of Chełm and parts of Polesia, a land which the Poles had also claimed as theirs. Many Polish nationalists were upset by this decision and protested against this fourth partition. As a result, demonstrations broke out in Galicia, Łódź, and Częstochowa, and thousands of soldiers deserted. The entire Polish administration in the Austrian occupation zone resigned. In Warsaw, pamphlets were distributed condemning this unjust treaty. The university decided to suspend lectures for 3 days. Soon, the anger died down after increased German pressure, but that wouldn't be the end of it. In summer of the same year, von Beseler ordered the Regency Council to appoint a new government, the State Council, consisting of 110 members. This council remained in session until the end of July, but ultimately achieved very little apart from voicing its frustration with the slow process of establishing a Polish state. Shortly after, von Beseler was surprised by the news from Ludendorff and Hindenburg that the war was essentially lost, and that an armistice would be necessary. From that point on, things suddenly happened very, very quickly. In October, the Regency Council published an appeal to the Polish people for an independent, free and democratic Poland, without informing von Beseler in advance. It also took control over the Polish armed forces, again without von Beseler's permission. But there was little he could do. In the eyes of the Regency Council, Germany had agreed to hand over responsibility towards Poland to the international community by accepting Wilson's 14 points. Von Beseler was only barely able to keep control over his general government. At the same time, the Austrian Empire was collapsing. The Polish members of the Austrian parliament declared themselves to be members of an independent Polish state. At the end of October, Polish soldiers and volunteers disarmed the Austrian garrison in Kraków and raised the red and white flag all over western Galicia. 1 week later, a provisional people's government of the Polish Republic was formed in Lublin, the former Austrian occupation zone. In Warsaw, Hans von Beseler still had German troops at his disposal. However, they had lost all motivation for their job in the face of imminent defeat. Germany could offer the Poles nothing. To prevent a potential revolution, Polish politicians asked von Beseler to release Piłsudski, a request which he fulfilled. On the 10th of November, Piłsudski arrived in Warsaw by train and was greeted by the leaders of the Polska Organizacja Wojskowa. On the next day, the three regions and the provisional government in Lublin placed all state powers in Piłsudski's hands and tasked him with the creation of a national government. On the 12th of November, Hans von Beseler and some of the remaining German soldiers were transported back to Germany by train. With that, after more than a century, the time of Polish partition came to an end. The first elections of the new Polish Republic occurred in January of 1919. In interwar Germany, some contemporaries concocted the narrative that it was in fact Germany's attempt to gain Polish trust and its leniency that had led to the loss of German territories in the east. Instead, the German Empire should have been much more strict so as not to foster Polish national ambitions. The former Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg was a popular scapegoat. Ernst von Glasenapp, the police chief of Warsaw during the occupation time, decried Bethmann-Hollweg's policies as weak and as a fiasco. Hans von Beseler also became the victim of verbal attacks by conservatives and nationalists because of his appeasing approach to the Polish question. In the National Assembly, von Beseler was harshly criticized by the centrist politician Matthias Erzberger. It is deeply regrettable that 16,000 German soldiers and officers ran away from Warsaw because 800 poorly armed Poles formed a mob. The disarmament and the none too brave conduct of the military governor Beseler have contributed to the weakening of Germany's reputation in the East. Obviously, there were also countless anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about a supposed stab in the back by the Jewish communist revolution that had occurred in Germany. The Regency Kingdom between 1916 and 1918 was a strange episode in Polish history. A kingdom without a king, and without clear borders that promised so much and yet delivered so little. Instead, it was essentially a military occupation that only cared about the immediate financial gains and exploited the land as efficiently as possible. At the end of the day, the independent Polish state was only declared to gain more manpower. Still, there were genuine attempts by people like Hans von Beseler who, despite their chauvinistic and paternalistic attitudes, genuinely believed that the coexistence between Germany and a Polish state was possible. But we're not done here yet, because in the next video we will look at how the German/Austrian occupation of Poland during the First World War shaped the lives of average Poles. We will take a closer look at the economic exploitation, the matter of forced labour, and the promotion of Polish education. Initially, I wanted to do both in one video, but then I decided to only focus on the political aspects and how the idea of an independent Poland was conceived among the Central Powers, for now, as the video would otherwise have been an hour long. So stay tuned for part 2. In the meantime, you should definitely go to my friend Sam Aronow's channel and watch his latest video about Samuel Schwarz, a Polish-Portuguese Jewish historian who was responsible for rediscovering the history of the Portuguese crypto-Jewish community. His video should come out on the same day as this one here. He has also promoted my video on his channel and has in general given me numerous shoutouts over the past few months, something I'm just incredibly grateful for. So hop on over and send him some love. Do it. Anyway, that's all for today. As always, Dankeschön for watching and I hope you liked the video. If you did, a like and a subscribe would be much appreciated. I would also like to give a huge and heartfelt shout out to my kind supporters over on Ko-Fi. A Cup of Tea, Tristan Kriegsmann, Ryan Layton, Philipp Marchewka, Marius Gerling, the Grand Duke of Zealand and Luca Drohle. You are absolutely fantastic. Have a very nice day and see you next time.